Shalom and welcome to Ta'alumot Ba'ivrit, Secrets in Hebrew. Today we're going to take a look at two Torah portions. We're going to look at this past week's Torah portion, Ki Tavo, which means when you come. And it's actually saying Ki Tavo, when you come into the land, which I have sworn to your fathers. This is talking about the land of Israel. This is talking to the children of Israel in the wilderness, saying when you come into the land. And then the Lord gives many different things to do within the land. Many things to do, what not to do, so on and so forth. But we have to also notice, as we're going to be looking at something in Deuteronomy 29, which is in Ki Tavo, is last week's Torah portion. Because in order to understand the context for Ki Tavo, when you come into the land, we have to look at something before. The Torah portion before that was Ki Tetzeh, when you go out. So notice that. The first week we have when you go out, and then the next week we have when you come in. Now, when it says when you go out, it says Ki tetzeh lamilchama al oivecha. When you go out to war upon your enemies. And then the following Torah portion is when you come into the land. So notice which one comes first. When you go out to war upon your enemies. You have to go out to war in order to come into the land. And we also have to understand what the land represents within the Torah. So notice that they never enter the land, all the children of Israel. This goes on actually as Joshua leads them, but that has been the whole goal, is to go into the land. When we study Torah, we have to understand that the land represents the Messiah's return. Now, of course, in each of our lives, we each have promised lands and markers that the Lord is bringing us to, taking us from glory to glory, different, whether it's with marriages, whether it's with kids, whether it's with jobs, ministries, all these different things. So we all have promised lands, but I want us to understand from a whole house of Israel perspective, the promised land is none other than the Messiah's return here. When the Messiah returns here, that is the ultimate promised land. Meanwhile, the wilderness represents this world. We are all in a wilderness today until the Messiah returns. So that's a very important thing to think about. So now, having that said, we have to understand is that in Deuteronomy 4:22, it calls the land of Israel, which they are going to come into, Haaretz Hatova Hazot. Remember how I said the land represents the Messiah. Haaretz Hatova Hazot, this good land. Haaretz Hatova Hazot, this good land, is equivalent in Gematria to 736. Which is equivalent to Yeshua Shmi. Yeshua is my name. So notice the land is none other than Yeshua. This is the second coming of Yeshua. This is what the land represents. So now we have to look at what takes place before we enter into the land, before the Messiah returns. Because remember, you cannot come into the land, according to the Torah, you cannot come into the land without doing what? Ki tetzeh lamilchama al oivecha. Without going out to war upon your enemies. After you go to war upon your enemies, then you can come into the land. Meaning, there is a war that we have to do, and we're going to see whom it is with, specifically in the Torah. And then the Messiah can come. The Messiah cannot come unless we go about this war. So the answer to who we actually go out to war with is here in the Torah portion, Ki Tavo, when you come in Deuteronomy 29, in verse 7. It says, "Then you came to this place and went out to war against you, Sihon, the king of Heshbon, and Og, the king of Bashan. So notice that these are the two kings that they had to go to war with. Now here's what's interesting about these two kings. These two kings, since the book of Numbers, they are repeated over and over and over and over again. You had to go out to war. You had to go to war with these two kings, the two kings of the Amorites. You went out to these two kings. The Torah is constantly reminding us that the children of Israel had to go to war with these two kings. Now we have to understand, everything tells us about the Messiah. And not only that, Paul, in 1 Corinthians 10, verses 6 and 11, he said, everything happened in the Torah for our sakes, on whom the end of the world has come. Meaning, everything in Torah, every mitzvah, what seems to be a story, all the situations actually happen for our sakes, meaning they all have practical application today. So the question is, these two kings that they had to go out against, one was Sihon and the other one was Og. These are the two kings of the Amorites, as they're named in Deuteronomy 4, verse 47. It calls them Shnei Malchei HaEmori. We have to understand, number one, who are these kings really? Because they're very, very important. And until we overcome them, we cannot enter the land, meaning Messiah cannot return. So there's a war that we have to go out against. Now we also have to understand, we do not war against flesh and blood. So Sihon and Og, it is not about us going out against people and having a war with people. Okay, and so we're going to talk about what this war looks like in a practical manner. Now, let's look at Sihon and Og. Sihon plus Og equals 207. 207 is equivalent to or, which is the word for light. This is the same word in the beginning in Genesis 1:3, Genesis 1:4. Vayomer Elohim Yehior Vayehior. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. He saw the light, it was good, so on and so forth. The light is none other than the Messiah. Now I can go about this from Genesis 1, and which is in my book, about how the light is none other than the Messiah. However, if we just take Yeshua's words as well, Yeshua said, I am the light of the world, or ha'olam. Or ha'olam, light of the world. Yeshua said, I am the light of the world, is equivalent to Mashiach. Equals 358. Messiah. So we see that the light is none other than the Messiah. So here's what's amazing. Sihon plus Og represent the light. They both represent the Messiah. The thing is that they're covered up in garments of what seem to be darkness, what seems to be evil, what seems to not be the light of the Messiah. But these two kings underneath these garments are actually none other than the light of the Messiah. And so now we have to look at what it means to go to war with these kings. As I said in Deuteronomy 4, verse 47, these two kings are known as Shnei Malchei HaEmori, the two kings of the Amorites. Shnei Malchei HaEmori. Now this is a very important phrase, because now we're about to see everything that we need to know in regards to how we go out to war. Because remember, we have to go to war with these two kings specifically, even today, in order for the Messiah to return. This is why over and over and over again, the Torah would continually tell us about Sihon and Og, because the Torah is trying to emphasize something in order to bring the Messiah, in order for us to enter the promised land, Yeshua's second coming. And as we saw, both of them, Sihon plus Og equals or, the light. They represent the Messiah, but they're not looking like the Messiah. So what does this mean? We have to go to war. We have to allow these two kings to look like the Mashiach. Okay? Shnei Malchei HaEmori, the two kings of the Amorites. in Gematria is 716, which is 2 times Messiah. Messiah is 358. 2 times 358 is 716. Now, they're 2 times Messiah. Why 2 times Messiah? Because there's 2 kings. Each of them represent the Mashiach. Each of them represent the Messiah. Okay? Now, let's go even deeper. We have to understand that these 2 kings are outside the land of Israel. They are not inside the land of Israel. You have to overcome them outside the land of Israel in order to enter into the land of Israel. Okay? If you take the first letter of each of these 3 words, Shnei Malchei HaEmori, you have a Shin, a Mem, and a Hey. These 3 letters together, Moses. So we actually see that it is Moses who is a type of Messiah, right? In Deuteronomy 18, the Lord and Moses said to the children of Israel, the Lord will raise up to you a prophet that is like me. He will raise to you the Messiah. He's going to be just like me. He's going to teach Torah, all of these different things that we can study throughout Moses' life. He's going to go through. Moses represents Messiah ben Joseph. And so what we actually see here is that Moses, or Messiah ben Joseph, the first coming of Yeshua, the first coming of Jesus is Messiah ben Joseph, we see hiding behind these 2 kings, which is why it's outside the land of Israel. Messiah ben David, the second coming of Yeshua, the second coming of Jesus, has to do with the land of Israel, inside the land of Israel. Right now, Messiah ben Joseph, Yeshua, is not inside the land of Israel. He's reigning amongst the nations. Just as Joseph did not reign in Israel, he reigned outside amongst the nations. For the last 2,000 years, we've been in the times of Messiah ben Joseph, where Yeshua is reigning outside the land of Israel. There is something we have to overcome with the Messiah right now outside the land of Israel in order for him to be returned inside the land of Israel, and we be joined with him. Okay, so Shnei Malchei HaEmori, the 2 kings of the Amorites, and as we saw, the first letter of each word, if you put them together, you get Moses. Moses in Gematria is 345. And 345 is also equivalent to Shiloh. Shiloh is the name for Messiah ben Joseph, the first coming of Yeshua, in Genesis 49:10. And it says in Genesis 49:10 that Shiloh will come, and to him will be the Yikahat Amim. To him will be the obedience of the peoples. But as I stress in my new book, Joseph's Identity Crisis, Uncovering the Messiah, Amim, which is related to Shiloh, the first coming of Yeshua, Amim is everybody but the Jewish people. It is specifically Gentiles. Meanwhile, the word Am is specifically the Jewish people. Amim is non-Jews, Am is Jews. And so it says, to Shiloh will be the obedience of the nations, of the peoples, the Gentiles, the non-Jews. And this is why Shiloh is outside the land of Israel right now. And so we have to think about what this means to go to war with these 2 kings who are representing Messiah ben Joseph outside the land of Israel in order to bring him inside the land of Israel. Okay? And so as we saw in Gematria equals 716. In ordinal numbers, which is Gematria Siduri, equals 140. And we're going to go down these numbers and explain what they mean. In reduced numbers, 32, and in final reduced numbers, 5. 32 plus 5 is 37. This is equivalent to Yeshu in ordinal numbers, which is a name for Jesus, for Yeshua during his first coming. It's also the gematria of Yechidah, which is the first coming of Yeshua. This is the word that's actually used that we see in Genesis 22, also John chapter 3 for the only begotten Son, also Judges 11:34 for the only begotten. This represents the first coming of Yeshua. Now 140, the reason this is very important that in ordinal numbers it's 140 is because 140 is the ordinal numbers of this, but it's also the gematria of Chokhmah plus Binah, wisdom plus understanding. wisdom plus understanding, meaning these two are key in the war that we're needing to go out against. So wisdom and understanding both are married together, and these two bring forth a revelation. Without wisdom and understanding, there is no revelation. Wisdom, understanding, revelation. And this is the reason why in the Proverbs it says, get wisdom, but in all you're getting of wisdom, get understanding. Why? Because wisdom with no understanding is not a proper revelation. Meaning I can have some type of wisdom of something very, very high, but if I don't develop it properly with understanding, learning how to make these things practical, it doesn't become a revelation in my emotional attributes and in my life to where it begins to live out of me practically in the way I speak, in the way I act, in the way I do things, in the way I truly, truly understand it. Understanding develops something that's very, very high. If you just have something that's very, very high, this does no good for you. This does no good for anybody around you. We have to have wisdom developed by understanding, and it gives birth to a revelation to where everybody around us can see these things. And so what it's actually saying is with Yeshua, we have to have not only the wisdom that he's the Messiah, that he's outside the land of Israel, that we're to follow him as our king, but we have to have understanding of what that means, that he's the Messiah, that we're to follow in his footsteps, that he is the Jewish Messiah and high priest of Israel. We have to have an understanding and develop these things so that he becomes a revelation within us, to the Jew first and to the Gentile. There has to be a revelation that Moses is out living amongst the nations. Only once this revelation happens will the Jewish people say, we want what you have. You have something according to Moses, we want this, because this is the one whom God said we would follow. He's going to be raised up like Moses. If he doesn't look like Moses, we don't want him. There has to be a proper understanding with the nations and following the concept of the wisdom of Yeshua being the Messiah, of Jesus being the Messiah, and what that looks like practically. Okay? And so, these two kings, how we saw these two kings representing the light of the Messiah, the reason that the light is not being revealed is because the Messiah is being covered up in klipot, which means like a shell or a barrier. Now, how does this happen? Why is the Messiah covered up in a klipot? It has to do with not having understanding. It has to do with not properly following him correctly, representing him properly, truly knowing him on a very intimate level according to the scriptures and through the Spirit of God. We have to overcome this. This is the war that we're facing today. And until we overcome this war, Messiah ben David will not come. This is a war that we're facing today, is we have to overcome the barriers that are upon Yeshua from being seen by all of the world. Like I said, to the Jew first and to the Gentile. The war is being able to reveal him properly to the Jewish people. Because Yeshua said to the Jewish people in Matthew 23:37-39, I will not return until you say, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Meaning the Jewish people have to call out to him. Okay, we also see this concept in Isaiah 27, that until the Jewish people take root in the Messiah, all of Israel will not be fruitful. We need Jew and Gentile together in the kingdom of God, one in Messiah. This has to take place. Okay, and so the war, one thing I want us to understand too, is that we can't just think about Messiah, Yeshua, in the heavens, and he's the Messiah. We have to clothe him properly, so on and so forth. We have to make this personal. The reason I say this is because only when we make it personal will it affect us, and we will want to make change, because it's a personal thing now. It's not just something from afar. It's here with us. Why do I say this? The Messiah lives in each and every one of us. A spark of the Messiah lives in every person. The difference is Messiah going to be revealed in his true authentic identity within each and every one of us. We, on our own selves, have klipot. We have barriers. We have sinful inclination. We have things that are not according to the Jewish authentic Messiah from the scriptures, and therefore do not reveal him properly. We have to go to war with ourselves. This war is actually with ourselves. We represent the two kings. But the light of the Messiah actually lives within us. But there's a bushel covering up the Messiah. This is why Yeshua said in Matthew 5, he goes, you don't put a lamp and allow a bushel to be over it, you remove the bushel. The bushel represents the klipot, it represents the barriers, the sinful inclination in our lives. We all have these things. Now, until we go to war with ourselves daily, we have to go to war with the evil inclination. We have a good inclination and an evil inclination in our hearts. The Yetzer Hara, the Yetzer Tov. And we have to go to war against the Yetzer Hara, which is the evil inclination. Only once we go to war with it daily and we perfect our own souls and we become a living representation of Yeshua, the Jewish Messiah of Israel, will people want and long for him and desire to draw near. And this is for the Jew and the Gentile. The Jew will want what we have. They will say, who's teaching you this? How are you following this? Why are you doing this? You have something, you do things according to the Torah, you do things according to what Deuteronomy 18 says, the Messiah that would do things according to Moses. But also the Gentiles will desire what we have because of the light and the joy and the kindness. And so we're actually going to see Jew and Gentile flooding to the Jewish Messiah because we have removed the klipot out of our own lives. Now, what do the klipot look like? What is this practical in our daily life? How do we make it practical? Well, each and every one of us have things that we need to be working on that hinder the Messiah. Now, one of them could be what happens if somebody is very, they get angry a lot. Well, if you get angry a lot and you're not patient, this doesn't represent the Messiah. The Messiah is patient. Does the Messiah have zeal and anger for righteousness? Of course. But the Messiah doesn't just go around getting angry all the time. He's continually patient, according to the scriptures, as we see in the Torah and the Tanakh and what's known as the Old Testament. Also in the New Testament, we see the patience of the Messiah. We see the joy of the Messiah. We need to be having joy in our lives and contentment and joy with where we're at. Always striving to be better, but nonetheless, we're happy and joyful where we're at. Bearing the fruits of giving, acts of kindness to one another. It could be somebody that talks too much. If you talk too much, learning how to, it says that within silence is wisdom, within the Proverbs. Or the way you talk. It's not even that you talk too much, it's the tone that you use whenever you talk to people. Okay? It could be pride. It could be many, many, many things. We have to find the things in our life that hinder the Messiah from truly being revealed. What we're truly going to war with is anything in our life that hinders the revelation of the Jewish Messiah. Anything that hinders the revelation of the Jewish Messiah is something that we have to personally take on to go to war with. And only whenever I personally go to war with these things and I overcome these things, then it will no longer be I who live, but Messiah in me, as Paul said in Galatians 2:20. And this is the reason why Yochanan the Immerser, John the Baptist, he said, I must decrease and he must increase. Meaning I have to lower myself and I have to just be a living vessel for him to live properly through me. This is the war of our own soul that we have to go through. And it will ultimately bring the soul of Israel into the revelation of the Messiah. I have to become the revelation of Messiah. You have to become the revelation of Messiah. Our families, our Talmidim, our teachers, in our workplaces, we all have to become the revelation of the Messiah. This is what it means to defeat the two kings, Shnei Malchei Amorite, not being revealed as an Amorite king and with certain sins and with certain things in our life, but uncovering those through removing all of these things out of our lives so that it is literally only the light of the Messiah that is seen within us. This is a very important concept, and we have to make sure that when we remove everything, nothing else is seen except Moses, Shiloh. Moses is equivalent to Shiloh. Remember the first coming of Yeshua. Only this, which means we can't dress the Messiah and want to walk in the steps of the Messiah according to our own standards. We have to find the steps of the Messiah according to the Torah of Moses, according to the scriptures. Yeshua said, I did not come to abolish, I came to fulfill fill and make it overflow with the Torah in Matthew 5. I came to teach you how to walk it out, and not one jot or tittle of the Torah will pass away until heaven and earth passes away. Meaning there's still the heavens and the earth today. That means every single jot and tittle, letter and word of the Torah is alive and active, sharper than a double-edged sword today, piercing through bone and marrow, ripping off things out of our lives that don't need to be there in order for us to walk as he walked. Because in 1 John 2:6, John says, if we say we abide in him, we also ought to walk as he walked. Meaning we are going to walk akevot HaMashiach, in the footsteps of the Messiah. So today, this is what we're overcoming. Today, this is our war in order to bring the Messiah. May we take it upon ourselves to do the work in building the kingdom together. First with tikkun nefesh. Tikkun nefesh is something in Jewish thought. What it means is a rectification of the soul. And it's a personal thing. Tikkun nefesh means I'm rectifying my soul. And then there's something called tikkun olam, a rectification of the world. We can't do tikkun olam, rectification of the world, unless each and every one of us do tikkun nefesh. Meaning I can't go and help those around me until I allow God to cleanse me of things within the process. And then I can be an example to those around me, and most importantly, an example of the Messiah. Shalom and kol tuv.